Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, well, there are some very big changes coming in the Pokemon trading card game. Now, one of them we have already looked at. I showed you a video a couple hours ago showing you that fairy Pokemon are being discontinued. They're literally just being taken out of the game. Now, the ones we've got will carry on, but we're not getting any new fairy Pokemon. This is weird, but we did that in the previous video. I'll link it in the description. Now, the news we've got today, there's a few news stories. I'm going to do everything in this video, and then over the next couple days, I might show you some videos digging deeper into some of these stories. Now, a bunch of them we have already talked about in other contexts. I will link those videos in the description where necessary. So, what's going on in the Pokemon trading card game? Well, that first turn rule that I told you was coming is coming. I told you it was going to be coming on February the 21st. It is coming on February the 21st. That is, of course, the day that Pokemon Sword and Shield is legal for tournament play. And it wasn't like I was making some kind of genius prediction. Japan had this rule coming in on the day Sword and Shield was legal, so we had to get it the day Sword and Shield was legal. The new rule is that the player going first on their first turn of the game is not allowed to play supporter cards. Now remember, we've already got a rule that the player going first is not allowed to use an attack. So here's what they say on the official site. At the start of the X and Y series, a rule was introduced to prevent the player who goes first from attacking on the first turn. Starting on February the 21st, 2020, the date that Pokemon TCG Sword and Shield becomes legal for tournament play, there will be an additional restriction. The player who goes first cannot play a supporter card on the first turn. This change is an attempt to make it less of an advantage to go first. Some strategies may benefit when the player goes second, but others might work out better if the player goes first. We hope this results in interesting choices in both gameplay and deck building. Make no mistake about it, when I say this is huge news, this is huge news. And when I say this is going to absolutely change the game and how we play it, this is going to absolutely change the game and how we play it. You see, as it stands at the moment, going first does give you a huge advantage. You get the first evolution, you get the first energy attachment, but you don't get the first attack. But you do get to play stuff like Welder. Now, the problem is that sometimes going first can be a bit good. So let's say you're playing a Mewtwo and Mew deck. Your opponent gets essentially one turn, and you get two. And they can attack on their first turn, but it's hard to do everything turn one. If you're playing Mewtwo and Mew, you're probably playing the Family Charizard, the one that for 4 energy can do 300 damage, which is enough to KO any tag team Pokemon. I mean, at the moment, any Pokemon in the game. VMAXs will change, but at the moment, any Pokemon in the game. So you need to attach on both turns. You need to discard the Charizard on one of your first 2 turns and Welder on one of your first 2 turns to get a turn 2 300 damage and get a KO on a tag team after your opponent's had a single turn. Things like this are an issue. But there is a very good chance this rule will create more issues than it solves. Because basically, going first now, you can use Pokemon abilities, think stuff like Dedenne, and you can use item cards, think stuff like Acrobike. But you can't attack and you can't use a supporter. So there are going to be more games where you pass turn 1 with only one Pokemon out. Because you just don't have the resources. You've got a supporter card, but you can't play the supporter. So unless you've got the other Pokemon or an item that will get it in hand, you're passing with one Pokemon. Well, what about stuff like Reshiram and Charizard? Reshiram and Charizard's GX attack, 3 energy, 200 damage. It's not a phenomenal attack, but if your opponent's got one non-tag team Pokemon active, it's probably going to win you the game. So you attach for turn, you Welder, you win. Or take something like Tapu Koko V, it can hit 200 damage for 3 energy. It's not a GX attack, it's just a regular attack. So what you essentially do is play Thunder Mountain Prism Star, and then Tapu Koko Prism Star to accelerate an energy, and then you attach an energy for the turn, and you're hitting 200 damage turn 1. This is going to create potentially a whole bunch of games where one player goes first and the other player gets a turn 1 KO and wins because the first player couldn't get another Pokemon out. We could be worrying over nothing, but I'm not entirely convinced this changes and fixes everything. Well, it changes a lot. Not sure it fixes everything. Weakness and resistance we've talked about quite a bit. Zacian here is showing off that we now do resistance at -30. For a long time, resistance has been taking 20 less damage from attacks. It's now -30. And we had this back in the beginning days of the Pokemon trading card game. I mean, if we look at something like, let's go Pidgey. Let's go proper old school little Pokemon. If we have a look at Pidgey, we can see that actually it was -30 back then. And it then got changed to -20. Well, it's back to -30. But a bunch of weaknesses have changed instead. Water-type Pokemon are now weak to lightning instead of grass. Take something like Inteleon as an example. And we see that Psychic-type Pokemon are now weak to darkness rather than Psychic. Look at Indeedee V as an example. And Darkness-type Pokemon are now weak to grass instead of fighting. Take something like Obstagoon as an example. Now, I have done a video about weakness and resistance explaining it. I will link it in the description. Resistances have changed a bunch as well. So Zacian is a metal Pokemon that is resistant to grass rather than psychic. And we can see something like Boltund here. It's a metal Pokemon, but it doesn't have its resistance to metal anymore. The resistance to metal has gone away. There are a bunch of changes. And this is going to really change what decks are better and which decks are worse. I mean, Lightning Pokemon just got a whole lot worse because they're no longer hitting Water Pokemon for weakness. But Darkness Pokemon just got a whole lot better because they're now hitting Psychic type for weakness. One of the examples, I did do a video about this, I'll link it in the description. The Hooper from Unified Minds, being a single energy pretty good Darkness attacker, just got a whole heap better. Another thing which has come along, which is really, this was always going to be the case, but it's made things a bit easier nowadays. Professor Magnolia, that card we've talked about that is just a reprint of Professor Sycamore, or indeed Professor Juniper, it's not actually called Professor Magnolia. It is called Professor's Research, Professor Magnolia. And what's going to happen is that every time we get a new game, the name Professor's Research will be used. If the card is updated in the future, the new Professor's name will appear in the upper right corner of the card, but the card name will remain Professor's Research. Now, it does specifically say that in the expanded format, there's already a rule that you cannot include Professor Sycamore and Professor Juniper in the same deck. The same rule applies to Professor's Research. It cannot be in the same deck as Sycamore or Juniper. This is really just a housekeeping rule, if I'm honest with you. It was always going to be the case that you couldn't put them in the same deck. You discard your hand and draw 7 cards. It's the fastest, most aggressive draw card we've really ever had. So there's no way we were ever not going to have this rule. All they've done is just make it a bit simpler and a bit easier by giving it just a Professor's Research thing. Does that mean then that every professor is going to have this, and that we're going to have this discard your hand and draw 7 rule essentially from now until the end of time? Maybe. It's very interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. Seems to suggest to me that when we get Generation 9, we're going to have a new professor, but we're still going to have the same card. Now, one thing I told you about before is that cards are going to have regulation marks. Now, we skipped A, B, and C. We went straight to D. All the Pokemon in Sword and Shield have the regulation mark D. Have a look at the Inteleon I showed you earlier as an example. Now, essentially, this is going to make it way easier to tell what's legal in tournament play. We are going to have a regulation D is fine. It doesn't mean anything now, but it will in the future. It also essentially guarantees a Sword and Shield on rotation, but then again, we always get a rotation like that. It is going to make the rotations easier to predict, incidentally, but it means that it's going to be 2020, it's going to be August, September 2021. That's when we're going to rotate to Sun and Moon on. So those regulation marks are kind of interesting. Now, we have had a few erratas. Now, we've talked about most of these before, but these are not necessarily just housekeeping. These actually can make the card significantly better. So, again, I'll link you to the video in the description, but both Energy Retrieval and Palpad let you search for up to 2 cards. So Energy Retrieval lets you take up to 2 basic energy from your discard and put them into your hand. And Palpad lets you take up to 2 supporters from your discard and shuffle them into your deck. Which means you can only take 1 if you like. So you can play Energy Retrieval and not have to pick up a second card, which could be huge if you want to play something like Lily, where you draw until you've got a certain number of cards in hand. The more cards in hand, the fewer you draw. So you pick up 1 energy and you get to draw 1 extra card with Lily. Or if you're playing 1 copy of a supporter, you can then put it back into your deck using Palpad, but not then put a second card in, which will clog up your deck a little bit. It's a good rule that's going to make things easier. Now, Lumberry and Citrusberry, now I'm putting the English scans up purely because it's easier because they're English scans, but they are getting reprints in Sun and Moon. And both Citrusberry and Lumberry either heal some damage or remove special conditions, and they do so between turns. Well, now they have been changed ever so slightly. Now they recover at the end of the turn. Now that can be incredibly relevant because it means that you don't have the special condition between turns, etc. So it means we never have to worry about, oh, does the poison go on or do you get healed? Because you're healed before the end of the turn, or at the end of the turn. Same thing with having damage and checking for a KO. It's no longer a question. Quick Ball has had a little bit of a remit. You can play this card only if you discard another card from your hand, search a deck for a basic Pokemon, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Of course, Quick Ball used to be a very different card, so what they've basically done is changed it. So the old Quick Ball for Mysterious Treasure, what you actually did was reveal cards from your deck until you reveal a Pokemon, show it to your opponent and put it into your hand. This is just Pokemon's way of saying that old Quick Ball no longer really exists. And we've got a little bit of a text change to Hyper Potion. Hyper Potion says, now Hyper Potion has always been that you heal 120 or you heal a bunch of damage and discard energy. But now they've changed the rule whereby heal 120 from one of your Pokemon that has at least 2 energy attached. If you healed any damage in this way, discard 2 energy from it. The wording here is very important because otherwise you'd be able to heal 120 and go, oh no, now there's no energy on it. It just heals 120. Obviously, the old Hyper Potion from Skyridge, which is very different, now essentially no longer exists. So these aren't just minor wording changes, these actually make a significant difference to the playability of these cards. Kind of is a bit of a big deal. Now the last couple points are far less of a big deal. So they've put a note in here about reminder text removal. In the past, abilities that could be used during your turn included a reminder text before you attack, to clarify that attacking was the last thing you could do in a turn. Starting with Sword and Shield, that reminder text won't appear anymore. In some cases, that reminder text could cause the text to be incorrect, since there are some abilities that can be used during the effects of attacks. For example, if you use Persian GX's Slashback GX attack and switch it with Heatran GX, Heatran GX's Burning Road ability activates when it becomes active, even though that happens during the attack. Basically, Persian switches to the bench when it attacks, and Heatran's ability lets you switch energy to it when it moves into the active, so actually it's not before you attack, it is while you are attacking. It's not needed because we all know that attacking ends your turn, but they make a very good point in the article that actually there are times when that's will actually lead to it being incorrect. And they've changed the word heal to recover. Back in the Black and White series, the term heal was introduced. For example, the card Potion says heal 30 damage from one of your Pokemon. Prior to that, it would have said remove 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon. For the Sword and Shield series, a similar term will be introduced for effects that remove special conditions. Going forward, this term will be recover. As an example, the Pokemon Center Lady has been updated in Sword and Shield to say, heal 60 damage from one of your Pokemon, and it recovers from all special conditions. It still has the same effect, but now the word recover can be associated with special conditions, just like heal is associated with damage. Fine. Like I say, it makes no actual real difference. It's more of just a language thing, but it's quite nice to have it, I suppose. As a side note, that will not stop previous Pokemon Center Ladies being legal. The cards are functionally identical. They've just changed one of the words. And finally, we now have a Pokemon CHECKUP. There's going to be a new term called Pokemon CHECKUP that will replace the phrase between turns, but it works in the same way. After a player's turn is complete, you enter Pokemon CHECKUP. You check for special conditions in this order: poison, burn, sleep, and paralyze. Then you check abilities and effects of trainer cards that happen during Pokemon CHECKUP. You can choose to do this step before checking the special conditions, but you cannot mix the two steps. And then you check to see if any Pokemon are knocked out. It is nice to have the certainty there. For instance, if you are poisoned, you would take the poison damage before you check for knocking out, etc. Doesn't really change anything. It's a linguistic thing. So a couple little linguistic things at the end there that don't make a huge difference, but several things here that do absolutely make a huge difference. And at this stage, I'd like to know your opinion on all of this stuff, so let me know in the comment section. Go nuts, be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at the Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where you can find out about a whole bunch of games that don't have any Pokemon in. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.